mining manages its waste will shape how the world judges its future. Tailings and water management aren't just technical hurdles, they are social, environmental, and financial tests that define a project's legacy. From ensuring safe storage to protecting scarce water resources, sustainability in tailings is no longer optional. It's the measure of responsible mining. Well, Terry Braun, the president of SRK North America and the new director of the Tailings Center, he joins us now to explore how the industry can turn these pressures into practical solutions. Terry, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
Devin, it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, look, when we talk about sustainability in tailings and water, what's really at stake for miners today? What has water become, why has it become such a defining issue, Terry?
Well, Devin, we all know that water is essential. Communities, we as human beings, we rely on water supplies. The physical aspects, it's for drinking, it's for irrigating crops. It's also a spiritual significance to we as human beings. And water in the natural ecosystem the ecosystems also rely on abundance or availability of water. And we know naturally that there's times of abundance and times of absence. And we also know that minerals will be where we find them. So when we see this coincidence of we see a prospective opportunity to develop responsibly a potential ore body, one of the first questions that we've got to ask in terms of the technical and economic assessment before we go any farther, is there water available and is it reliable? Now, what does the mine do, right? A typical mine will need to move water one way or another. We will dewater open pits. We will dewater underground mines. We will process ore, and that typically requires water, significant amounts of water per unit of ore processed. We also use water to convey materials at times. And wherever we convey materials using water, we have entrainment, which is sort of a loss of water. And our mining projects will also impact the water balance by creating surface water features that increase evaporation that might not have otherwise occurred. So these impacts are real and known. So this conversation we're talking about, Devin, between how do you balance the demand of what the community and the ecosystem needs to thrive with what the mining can do and mitigate, that's the forefront conversation our industry is dealing with.
Now, you've mentioned that there's still no consistent framework for disclosing how mines manage water, right? I mean, in simple terms, what does water stewardship actually mean on the ground? And what kind of standards or governance could make those decisions more transparent and defensible?
If we go back about 20 years, Devin, to around 2005, say 2006, 7, we started to see movement in terms of moving towards water stewardship as a goal, not just as a philosophy, but also as a means of disclosure and transparency. So we truly understood what trade-offs we were making as we had developed water resources. This is not unique to the mining industry if I go back that far. United Nations came out with a CEO water mandate, which started the first framework. And in Australia, about the same time, we saw water accounting frameworks coming out. The first time there was a structured fundamental accounting or water balance that allowed us to communicate about water inputs, water use, water discharge. And if you go back to even 10 years ago, we saw the Global Reporting Initiative, which was generally tied to climate change early on, starting to expand their stakeholder consultation process related to water inputs and outputs. And then finally, again, in the last 10 years, we've seen sustainable accounting standards come out. So we've got not just the companies themselves reporting voluntarily, but we've got disclosures coming through international governing bodies. And finally, Devin, if you go just to the last 5 years, in 2021, there was another thrust towards trying to refine and reconcile these water stewardship frameworks in order to get more balance and clarity, right? So the Climate Disclosure Board produced a water reporting guideline that cross-referenced 10 other disclosure standards. This is just 4 years ago. And the International Council on Mining and Metals and Mining also produced a standard that had a cross-reference to 6 different standards. So I think we're converging. But the bottom line is the folks that really look at this space, they see this convergence in terms of methodology. But not all companies follow the same frameworks, and not all companies choose to disclose. And finally, and lastly, these specialists also see a gap in terms of the level of disclosure. We can consolidate and report a region, we could report on a country, but one of the real values in this transparency of water stewardship is at the point of use or at the site level. So we've come a long way, but there is room to improve.
And it's interesting because if you look carefully, you can see these examples surfing on the ground. Like in places in Ecuador, for example, we've seen projects stall when communities fear for water security. How should mines engage early and co-design solutions to build that trust, Terry?
Well, Devin, it goes back to the first question here, right? So water availability is strategic, right? So, and because of the demand of a mining company's, there's some level of water demand, and certainly a disturbance or a reallocation of resources. So when a mining looks at this, when a mining company must appraise these, the early way on an evidence type database is to first have a good understanding of what this basin not just physically is capable of yielding, but understanding the significance of the water resources, the reliability, again, the physical and almost the spiritual nature, as well as the ecosystem demands. And that's probably where the evidence of direct measurement, we probably have the biggest gap, in my opinion, because we could monitor water levels, we could monitor stream flows, we could monitor water quality. It takes time to get a look at natural availability of times of abundance and times of absence. So our models have a lot of uncertainty, even with evidence that we can collect today. So what this means to the mining industry is that you've got to engage with your communities. You've got to have an ability to assess, and the stakeholders aren't just, it's the users, it's the community. It's also doing the right thing and understanding the science of the ecosystem. And probably the more significant point we're seeing emerge now is this spiritual side. There is an engagement process with Indigenous, First Nations, folks that have a long time relationship with the land and the water. And it's this dialogue that's starting earlier and earlier in the mining process, or the mining process, that will either continue a project with a successful balance of communication and allocation of offsets versus the impacts.
Now, you look at tailings, it's such a big part, such a significant part of the mining process, right? Yet many sites still inherit the old habits. I mean, where do you see the biggest legacy risks here? And how should companies factor, let's say, future liabilities into decisions today?
Perfect. Look, it goes back to I'll stay on the water theme. Some of these legacy pitfalls that I've been personally involved in, and this happens to be in the United States, in the northwest corner of New Mexico, where there's a molybdenum mine that was operated better part of, say, 50 years, and it went to an open pit model roughly within the last 50 years, and it had an underground block cave and lots of sulfides, and a project's been closed. And right now, the legacy pitfall is a long-term water treatment obligation that, in a present value context, is close to $1 billion on a balance sheet. That not every company can afford. This happens to be an oil company that has inherited this liability. Had they known about that long-term water treatment obligation, they might have changed how they managed where they put their waste, how they might relocate their waste, or whether they produced those wastes in the first place. The second example, Devon, is a proposed mine in northern Minnesota, which is also in the U.S. And I watched as that project went from a broader development concept, which made it had a good balance of community engagement and science, good science behind it. And yet, at the end of the day, the sensitivity towards a watershed disturbance that would have potentially impacted an adjacent area changed the board decision to reduce the footprint of the mine, to not have that risk, which reduced the resource, it reduced the reserves, had a definite economic impact. The project's still in the proposed phase. But those two examples to me of making a commitment and inheriting a commitment versus avoiding a commitment, that's a sign of the balance and the trade-offs we're seeing in industry today.
And I suppose what you're speaking to, and this is a good segue to bring this in, the global industry standard on tailings management. Terry, what does it change in practice? I mean, who's involved? How do you keep that engagement going through closure?
One of the things that the global international standard on tailings management did for the mine industry is it responded to a wake-up call where we did not have a handle on, we as an industry did not have clarity on, the complexity of the systems that we're creating as our mines get larger or into areas where we have challenging physical, the engineering is challenging, the inherent complexity of the tailing systems, for example, and the credible failure modes that we do and understand, and how just subtle changes might create different potential for failure. This has driven a rethink of how we integrate a knowledge base, how we create a knowledge base which does include all the stakeholders around the room, the free and prior informed consent concept, which is long held and long established, but it's been brought back to the forefront in GISTM in order to have a good basis of understanding what could go wrong, where the uncertainty is. We've created review panels, independent technical review boards, geotechnical review boards, to challenge the assumptions of the design engineers. We've created new data streams that'll help us assess or test for indicators of a potential risk area. And this all ties into, ultimately, Devin, into what I believe will be, there are annual reports, or if there need to be more frequently, more reports to the community and engagement with the community about how GISTM helps us understand these systems better and to be transparent about the choices we're making in order to protect human health and the environment.
Terry, as I wrap up, I mean, you've occupied a number of positions that sort of give you a window into the problems experienced in this area, right? Now, as I wrap up, from an SRK perspective, as technology and climate pressures reshape mining, what gives you the optimism that the industry can truly close the gap between, let's say, compliance and sustainability?
Well, Devin, it does take a world of experience, I think. And if I borrow that integrated knowledge base, consulting firms like SRK or industry academic consortiums, of which there are a number, the Tailings Center is one, we're getting these forums together where we have people driving industry initiatives in the field of how tailings are managed, the concepts of integrated landforms, commingling waste rock and tailings to improve these systems. These industry bodies looking to find ways to reduce the water footprint, to find technologies that reduce the amount of water required to operate and to leave a facility that is chemically and physically stable for the foreseeable future, and to have engagement during that process with local communities. That makes me optimistic that I see these forums growing and I see attention being paid to this. It's around the world. In fact, last comment on this is I had the opportunity to visit the Sustainable Minerals Institute at the University of Queensland in Australia. And I spent a great day engaging with a group there, thinking about the very same concepts, as well as the social transition concepts of how we bring a project online, assuming we've got the right plans, and how we operate and transition into a post-mining state. It's exciting to see that space and that people are thinking about these ideas. The right people are thinking about these ideas now.
Well, look, it's a fascinating aspect of sustainability, and we'll keep our eye on it for sure. Terry Braun, President of SRK North America. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, Terry.
Pleasure's been all mine, Devin. Thank you.